Seeking Wisdom, Week 16. Amos, the prophet that condemns injustice. To understand how difficult the prophetic mission or ultimate vision of Amos was, we need to understand the political situation in the northern kingdom. Overall, the kingdom of Israel is in a state of peace and prosperity. With the Syrians no longer a threat and King Jeroboam reclaiming the land beyond the Jordan, the economy of Israel is booming. People are building houses and buying furniture to decorate the houses. They are partying and celebrating, and trade with others is very profitable. This is when Amos tried to warn everyone about the loss of the country to the Assyrians, which was imminent, and denounced injustice in the society in which the rich got richer and the poor were exploited. This was how Amos showed the people that they were living with a false sense of security and forced the rich to see the misery they were causing many people. Amos was a hated man amongst the rich and the country's leaders. And just as Amos foretold, Assyria got a new king in 747 BC, and this put Israel in danger. In 732 BC, the new king of Assyria took over Syria and 3 provinces of Israel, resulting in Israel falling and being captured. The result? Israel was almost erased off the map, and the Israelites were held captive by Assyria. Amos was the very first prophet to have a book in the Bible named after him. Although his words were spoken and later compiled into books, it's still unclear if they were written by Amos or his disciples. Amos, a shepherd in the Tekoa region near Bethlehem of Judah, lived in the 8th century when Jeroboam II was king of Israel. Amos could not resist when God himself called Amos to be a prophet. Knowing he didn't come from the priesthood or prophetic lineage, he accepted that he was to be a prophet in Bethel, the main temple of the kingdom of Israel, which was built when the country was still divided in 933 BC. Amos chapter 7 recounts the encounter between himself and the chief priest in Bethel, who was worried because Amos dared to prophesy against the king in the temple. This mission did not last long for Amos because the chief priest told him to return to Judah. After his return to his hometown in some time, he and his disciples began to record their visions and prophecy and circulated them amongst the people. The book of Amos contains a number of other prophetic words which may have been added later to represent the message of Amos in new circumstances, such as the prophecies against Judah or the last promise. We need to take a good hard look at the composition of this book, because in order to convey his message, Amos used a concise, straightforward, and hard-hitting pen. Amos called the noble women of Samaria cows of Bashan, and also foretold that the wife of the priest Uzziah would be a prostitute in the city. Amos uses vivid images, especially those taken from nomadic life, and many times he plays with words. But unfortunately, in the translation, this was not shown. Amos has a fairly clear layout with 4 pretty distinct parts. The first being the judgment of Israel's neighbors. The second is the judgment of Israel. Third is the 5 visions or the threats and promises. And the conclusion or the vision of reviving Israel. Amos is a prophet that can most easily relate to our world and society today. He became the conscience of the country and spoke for humble people after denouncing the injustices in the Israelite society of the 8th century. The prophet Amos taught the Israelites a lesson then and wants Christians today to remember this lesson. Social justice is a matter of religion. Amos's message emphasizes the equality between Israel and other countries, and after prophesying against Israel's neighboring countries, he declared judgment against Israel. And although Israel is the chosen people and God liberated them from Egypt, this was not a solid guarantee for Israel, adding to their responsibility. Israel knew better than any other nation what the Lord demanded, but other nations such as the Philistines and the Arabs also have their salvation history. The book of Amos emphasizes the sins against people and natural laws, such as when Moab was convicted of burning the bones of the king of Edom. Keep in mind that the sins of Israel were not only against the covenant, but also demeaned justice and the conscience of every human being. At this point, Amos feels the pull towards some of the wise writings, such as the book of Proverbs, which focuses on a universal moral law, not the revelation of Israel. In Amos's eyes, God is the God of nature and history, and the hymns of praise are praise to God, the creator of the universe, and he believes all events happen at the hand of God. He also believes God is responsible for both the good and the bad. Does disaster befall a city unless the Lord has done it? And there is no room for chance or demonic activity in this world. So if God has to punish us, it shows that even though he loves us, it still hurts him and he feels betrayed, but is still ready to give salvation. Human pleas can make God reconsider what he has decided. The prophecies against religion in Bethel shows us that while the Israelites were still worshiping, not all of their rituals showed the true meaning of Christianity. He believed that social justice and true worship needed to be part of their rituals to be true to the covenant. Many of the sacrifices used by the Israelites made the leaders complacent, and they cared very little for the needs of the poor, and unrighteous deeds were quick to fill their time after the temple sacraments or celebrations. Through the visions of this very humble man, we see the end of Israel, temples tumbling, people dying, and many natural disasters such as earthquakes, eclipses, and famines. But this book also gives us a hope for a bright future, for we know that God will not destroy all of Israel. He still loves the remnants of the old Israel, and those that are still faithful after the many tests. It is these people that will keep God's people alive. This book closes with the final vision of Israel being revived by the leadership of a king from the lineage of David. Our lives are similar to the book of Amos in many ways. Seek the Lord and live. Just as in the time of Amos, we have economic, political, and social ruin, as well as our moral compasses have gone awry. Amos, speaking from the love of God, trying to reach the people, proclaimed full of concern for the future of a nation. He cried to them with dreadful words, not to destroy them, but to call them to seek God so they can live. In chapter 5, God condemns the formal ritual and ceremony of Israel, a kind of worship that is in no way associated with the just and right life of their times. It was more of a festival of liturgy that focused on noisy singing and the sacrifices. God became tired of the large celebrations that didn't focus on living by the covenant. "Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." All God wanted was social justice among his people living in the covenant. Two extremes that we can easily fall into are only worshiping and forgetting our everyday lives, or to keep religion in our hearts but not practice what God wants us to do. Just to live by charity is not enough. We need to find a happy medium between the two extremes so we don't fall into a trap in our religious lives. Through baptism, we have all become brothers in God's family or the church or the Spirit incarnate. Our faith needs to be expressed in language, gestures, and in deeds. It cannot be separated from our social lives, but should be shown on the street as well as in the church. The poor have a very powerful advocate on their side, God. Amos the prophet, who is famous for being concerned about social issues and condemning the injustices of contemporary society, was always on the side of the poor and weak and heard the cry for help the weak. Just think, God is the God of the poor. He always loves everybody, especially the rejected and marginalized. The story of a grandmother accused of stealing cassava because she was hungry, and a judge who cries after reading out the verdict on her. In a courtroom, Judge Marzuki sat silently as he listened to a prosecutor reading out a sentence demand on a grandmother accused of stealing cassava. The grandmother said she was poor, had a dying son, and a hungry grandchild. But a manager of the market was firm on the demand, saying it should serve as an example for other citizens. Judge Marzuki took a deep breath and decides to make a different verdict, something that was not sought by the prosecutor. "I am sorry," the judge said as he looked at the grandmother. "I can't make you must be sentenced. You must pay 1,000,000 rupiah in fines, and if you can't pay, you must go to jail for 2.5 years as sought by the prosecutor." The grandmother was abject and broken-hearted. Judge Marzuki, however, took off his hat, filled it with 1,000,000 rupiah from his wallet. He then told the audience in the court, "In the name of the court, I now order each person in this courtroom to pay 50,000 rupiah, because you, as citizens of this town, have let a person suffer from hunger and forced her to steal to feed her family. Mr. Clerk, please collect the money in my hat and give all of the money to this defendant." After Judge Marzuki knocked his gavel and leaves the courtroom, the grandmother receives 3.5 million rupiah from the donation. It included 50,000 rupiah from the market manager, who was ashamed of accusing the woman. This is a very strict and moving trial, but also a true story of our time. We are all responsible for the lives around us. We need to eliminate injustice, or at least not add to a world that already has so much injustice. We can only understand the book of Amos that recognizes the serious consequences of injustice when we ourselves are victims of injustice in this life. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this week's lesson. Please join us next Friday for our new video. The answers to this week's questions will be revealed in next week's video. Remember, every Friday at 7 p.m., the Seeking Wisdom Challenge will be posted on YouTube and Facebook. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, or subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and we wish you a wonderful weekend full of grace and joy.